Um, Looking forward to getting started this morning. Um, we're going to kind of be telling a story in our message, a familiar story for many of us. Um, and it's really at the heart of what I've been trying to focus on every week, which is sort of the fundamentals of getting on this deeper path of self-inquiry, enlightenment. Uh, and Ray, would you mind shutting those doors, please? Thank you. So we're going to begin with a familiar, it's a little low, yeah? We're going to begin with a familiar story. Disney picked it up about 30 years ago, very successful film, Beauty and the Beast. And you remember the story, it's a very arrogant and handsome prince. And in a very dark and rainy night, he gets a knock on the castle door. And it's an old, haggard woman who's begging for food and shelter. And he turns his nose up at her and slams the door in her face. And it turns out to be a goddess. And she curses the prince because his beauty and his wealth and power did nothing to open his heart to truth. She cursed him to be this ugly beast. And he had a limited amount of time to find true love and have someone truly love him. And it was this magical rose, remember this, that was in that glass case. And before that last rose petal fell, he had to seal the deal with the beauty, which would end up being Belle, who represents the soul, this essence of enlightenment. And so the story is really this myth of trying to overcome the impulses of the lower nature, the beast in nature, and to discover the secret soul within and bring our minds to this embrace or this kiss with this lost spark of the divine, this bell, this beauty that is actually residing within us. But we have to overcome our bestial nature in order to do that. So the hilarity of the movie is he gets through this culturing process, he's developing sensitivity, he's beginning to feel more refined in his character, and as a result of this refinement, even though he's still clumsy through it all, he's beginning to draw nearer to the bell, to the spark, to the divine. And eventually, of course, we know how the story ends. He transforms, there's the great alchemy, and everyone's happy. And so we're going to be talking about this in a number of different ways this morning. And we're going to be using the teachings of Buddhism and Sufism primarily and exploring this beauty and beast theme. And what I wanted to also bring out too is that we're creating our own myth. Like everyone here is on their own journey. So there's really no structured path per se that everyone is going to find their cookie cutter approach to discovering this hidden spark, this divine essence. So that's one of the reasons why on a Sunday morning I like to present the smorgasbord of different teachings so that you can find what resonates with you and see also the commonalities that they often share with one another, even if they're separated by centuries and cultures. We're going to begin, I guess, with Rumi. And Rumi is an interesting character. His father was a great mystic and scholar, and they grew up near Afghanistan, and they eventually migrated to Turkey. And Rumi, in his own right, from a very early age, became a great scholar in law, Islamic law, and he was also a great esoteric practitioner or Sufi. But Rumi has said from his own testimony that he didn't really know the essence of reality of God until this very enigmatic and strange figure showed up in Turkey, Shams of Tabriz. And Shams of Tabriz knew his father, Rumi's father, but his father had passed away by the time that Shams showed up. And he was very, let's say, unconventional. And we're going to see this theme throughout. Just like the old haggard woman that presented herself as this beggar and who was asking the prince for some shelter and some sympathy, You'll see in the divine path of transformation, we're often confronted with people and situations that seem to be very non-divine, actually off-putting. We have an initial repugnance towards certain things that are actually God in disguise. And it's showing us our superficiality. It's showing us our own lack of depth. And so Shams of Tabriz was that kind of a character. He would say things and do things in a very unconventional way that would offend the religious sentiments of many. But Rumi saw through it. And Rumi fell in love with Shams and became his ardent disciple. And Shams, as Rumi says, split open his skull. And Rumi got to see what is truly at the heart of reality. And long story short, Rumi's disciples did not like Rumi spending so much time with Shams. And rumor has it, legend has it, that they actually murdered Shams. Shams disappeared one day and never came back. And you'll find that this is also another theme that occurs often. These great enlightened beings are often so off-putting and to the point where people want to murder them. So Shams, and as we're going to see when we open up our study on Zen or the teachings of Bodhidharma, Bodhidharma also was considered this off-putting kind of a character. We'll get more into that, who is also somewhat to the point where people wanted him dead, and legend has it they killed him. But back to Rumi and back to creating our own myth. So let's open this up here, and this is Rumi's The Big Red Book. This is all of the poems and reflections that Rumi had regarding Shams of Tabriz. John? 9th century, so about 1000. I don't have the exact date of his life here, but early Middle Ages, or mid-Middle Ages, I should say, around 1000. Anyway, so here's Rumi. Unfold your own myth. Who gets up early to discover the moment light begins? Who finds us here circling, bewildered like atoms? Who comes to a spring thirsty and sees the moon reflected in it? Who, like Jacob, blind with grief and age, smells the shirt of his lost son and can see again? So what Rumi's going to do now, he's going to unfold all these stories about Jacob, about Moses, about Jesus, and he's going to show you how these stories only hint at what's to come. So who, like Jacob, or who, like Moses, goes for fire and finds what burns inside the sunrise? Jesus slips into a house to escape enemies and opens a door to the other world. Solomon cuts open a fish and there's a gold ring. Omar storms in to kill the prophet and leaves with blessings. These are all apocryphal stories, yes? So he goes on, chase a deer and end up everywhere. An oyster opens his mouth to swallow one drop. Now there is a pearl. A vagrant wanders empty ruins, and suddenly he is wealthy. But do not be satisfied with stories. Right, so this is really getting to the heart of our talk today. Do not be satisfied with stories. How things have gone with others. Unfold your own myth without complicated explanations, so everyone will understand the passage from the Quran we have opened to you. Start walking toward Shams, the teacher, the sun. Your legs will get heavy and tired. Then comes a moment of feeling the wings you have grown, lifting. So a little wordplay here. Shams means sun, right? That's the name Shams in Arabic, or Shemesh. In Hebrew, Shams is sun, S-U-N. And so Rumi's saying, don't be satisfied with all of these stories, all of these myths. You must unfold your own myth. Don't think of the divine in terms of how it showed up for others. In fact, when we really get to the heart essence of reality, there is no other, right? So this is our talk today. This is going beyond words, hopefully, into something of the intangible, the transcendental. And that brings us to Zen. I'm going to read just a little bit from Bodhidharma's teaching. This is the translation by Red Pine. Bodhidharma, as I was mentioning briefly, was a high-born Indian Brahmin. About 507-6 was his year. He left India and took a slow boat to China. And the iconic story is that when he got to China, Buddhism had already been there for a century or so. And so there are temples everywhere. He ends up going into the palace and seeing the Emperor Wu, the Chinese emperor. And the Emperor Wu takes this opportunity to tell Bodhidharma, this very renowned sage, I have built all these temples. I'm feeding all of these monks. I'm having all of these sutras copied for posterity. What's my reward? And Bodhidharma looks at him and he says to the emperor, you're going to the lowest hell. And the emperor said, what are you talking about? How dare you? And as Bodhidharma turns his back in a huff and is walking away from the emperor yells, who are you? Bodhidharma turns around and says, I don't know, and leaves. And this is the iconic display of Zen. What Zen is getting at is that there's something intangible in all of us, something nameless in all of us, and you can't get it through good works or building some kind of reputation or merit. It's something that you must uncover by yourself, just like Rumi was saying. You have to unfold your own myth. You have to realize that where you are right now, the divine is working and conspiring to help you unfold this myth if you display the willingness to follow. So Bodhidharma leaves, and he goes up into the mountains of Shaolin in China. And again, legend says that it was there that Bodhidharma sat facing a wall doing zazen for 9 years, all alone in Shaolin. And rumors started to spread, and this individual by the name of Hui Ke came to see Bodhidharma and wanted initiation into the esoteric teachings of Buddhism. And Bodhidharma just basically said, go away, I have no use for you. Again, he stayed out there for days and days in snow and rain and all of the elements. And eventually Hui Ke couldn't bear it anymore and cuts off his right arm and lays his right arm in front of Bodhidharma. And Bodhidharma says, now you're ready. And he began to initiate Hui Ke into the secret teachings. And they practiced, and again, more legend here just for your titillation. It says that when Bodhidharma was meditating so that he wouldn't fall asleep, he would pull his eyelashes off and he would throw them. And wherever they landed, tea bushes would grow. And this is how tea came to China. And this is why they serve tea in monasteries, to keep you up at night. So as a result of Bodhidharma being in Shaolin and gathering all of these disciples over some time, he began to teach the ways of Gong Fu. And so Gong Fu began to develop through Bodhidharma. Again, more legend. But these are the origin moments of these great teachings in ancient China. Well, Bodhidharma pissed off some people, as we had mentioned earlier. And eventually, it said that Bodhidharma was murdered by some of his followers. Disappeared one day. And when they did actually find some coffin or box buried nearby, when they opened it up, there was one sandal in the box. They thought that Bodhidharma was there, but all that was there was one sandal. And it wasn't long after that that a trader had said that he met a wild man, an Indian man, carrying a staff, and hanging off the staff was one sandal. And he was making his way back to India. And so again, Bodhidharma somehow eluded death, or was, unstoppable in the face of death. But there's a little bit about his legend, a little more about his teaching here. Now listen carefully and keep in mind this idea of unfolding your own myth. This mind is the Buddha. Beyond this mind, you'll never find another Buddha. To search for enlightenment or nirvana beyond this mind is impossible. The reality of your own self-nature, the absence of cause and effect, or karma, is what's meant by mind. Your mind is nirvana. You might think you can find a Buddha or enlightenment somewhere beyond the mind, but such a place doesn't exist. Trying to find a Buddha or enlightenment is like trying to grab space. Space has a name but no form. It's not something you can pick up or put down, and you certainly can't grab it. Beyond this mind, you'll never see a Buddha. The Buddha is a product of your mind. Why look for a Buddha beyond this mind? So the mind is this ungraspable, intangible awareness, right? This ground of all being. And you're it. You're aware. What is this awareness? We said last week, this Harvard student went to the Korean Zen master Songsan, and he's explaining his theories about everything. And he said in his description of this one-on-one meeting with the master, as the Harvard student kept going on in this feverish attempt to describe his plans to solve all of the knots of philosophy and religion, the Korean Zen master points in his face and yells, "Who are you?" And that was the evaporation of all of his conceptual gymnastics. And then when that moment hit, and there was this pause of, I don't know, then he says to the student, study that. Turn around and look at your nature. Who are you? Because everything else is a product of your mind, a conjuring of your mind, clouds in the sky. And so Bodhidharma is saying, without discovering your mind, you will continue to roam in these endless realms of rebirth, looking outside of yourself at shadows and images and symbols, not realizing you have the priceless Dharma jewel of pure Buddha awareness as your very nature. So turn around and look, sit, be still. If you think there's a Buddha beyond the mind, where is he? There's no Buddha beyond the mind. So why envision one? You can't know your real mind as long as you deceive yourself. As long as you're enthralled by a lifeless form, you're not free. As long as you're, if you don't believe me, deceiving yourself won't help. It's not the Buddha's fault. People, though, are deluded. They're unaware that their own mind is the Buddha. Otherwise, they wouldn't look for a Buddha outside the mind. Whoever sees his nature is a Buddha. If you don't see your nature, it doesn't matter if you invoke Buddhas, recite sutras, make offerings, and keep precepts. They're all useless. Everything else produces karma. If you don't understand by yourself, you'll have to find a teacher to get to the bottom of life and death. So this is what we're talking about. We mentioned it with Rumi. He had an inkling of understanding, more than most, but until he met Shams, he didn't get to the bottom of life and death. Same goes for another Sufi master that we're going to look at now, Imam al-Ghazali. And Ghazali died in 1111. You could always remember that year. And he was the premier scholar in Baghdad. Nobody topped Ghazali. He was a polymath, medicine and law and theology and philosophy. He knew it all. And he was the man. Everyone, right up to the Sultan, came to listen to Ghazali. And it gets to the point where, as we'll see with Naropa, Ghazali begins to see that all of this is empty. He feels torn now between his intellectual and conceptual life and this yearning to really get to the very core or essence of who he is. So this is taken from his famous book, The Path to Sufism. So he says, one day I would firmly resolve to leave Baghdad and disengage myself from those circumstances, and another day I would revoke my resolution. I would put one foot forward and the other backward. In the morning I would have a sincere desire to see the things of the afterlife, but by evening the hosts of passions would assail it and render it lukewarm. Can anybody relate? So this tug of war between the false self and the real self is what he's describing. And what is very important to recognize is he had reached the pinnacle of what can be given to the false self. Wealth and prestige and honor and position and influence. He was the full flowering of the false self at this point, and it still didn't satisfy. So he's in this tug of war, and he says, mundane desires began tugging me with their chains to remain as I was, while the herald of true faith was crying out, get away, get up, go. Only a little is left of your life, and a long journey lies before you. All the theory and practice in which you are engrossed is eye service and fakery. Right? So, again, this really hits home for me because for so long I've been, and this is lifting and lifting as the years go by. But the drive to wake up, the drive to know, the drive to be enlightened has always been, since the early 90s, this fire in my soul. But I saw how for many, many years, decades, I got derailed into trying to find it through the thoughts of others, right? Through this attempt to hear it from others rather than discovering it for myself, right? So Ghazali is basically getting to the point where he can't deal with the pressure, with the stress, with the inner conflict and turmoil, so much so that he becomes mute. He can't open his mouth and speak. So he's in front of his classes at Baghdad University, and he can't talk. And so it gets to the point where he has to, take a sabbatical, and he can't eat, he can't sleep, can't even drink water. And so the doctors are coming to him and basically saying, we got to deal with this. It's a heart condition. It's something psychological that has led to such a weakening of his life. And so he says, this is something which has settled in his heart, the doctor is saying, and crept from it into his humors. There is no way to treat it unless his heart be eased of the anxiety which has visited it. And Ghazali then says, when I perceived my powerlessness and when my capacity to make a choice had completely collapsed, I had recourse to God Most High, as does a hard-pressed man who has no way out of his difficulty, right? Total surrender and collapse. Total existential breakdown. Right? Just like Hui Kei cutting off his right arm. It's a symbol of basically saying, I'm surrendering all of my personal power. I'm giving it to the teaching, to the teacher. I don't want my life as it is. I need to know what's real, what's true. This is what drives the seeker. Like Morpheus said to Neo in that first Matrix movie, your question, what is the Matrix, is what brought you here. It's like a splinter in your mind, right? If it doesn't get to the point where you are willing to sacrifice your very life for this teaching, oftentimes the opportunity doesn't open for you because you're just not ready yet. There's still the tug of war. So finally here, Ghazali, because he's accumulated some wealth over the years, gives his money to his wife and his kids and gets out of town. Goes from Baghdad, travels all the way to Syria and Jerusalem and down into Medina and Mecca. And he's studying with the Sufis. And he's getting the esoteric teaching. And he's waking up. And he's saying here, for 10 years I remained in this condition of deep study and reflection. In the course of those periods of solitude, things impossible to enumerate or detail in depth were disclosed to me. This much I shall mention, that profit may be derived from it. I knew with certainty that the Sufis are those who uniquely follow the way to God Most High. Their mode of life is the best of all, their way the most direct of ways, and their ethic the purest. Indeed, were one to combine the insight of the intellectuals, the wisdom of the wise, and the lore of scholars versed in the mysteries of revelation, in order to change a single item of Sufi conduct and ethic and to replace it with something better, no way to do so would be found. For all their motions and quiescences, exterior and interior, are learned from the light of the niche of prophecy. So what makes the Sufi different is the veil has been removed from the mind. They have died to the lower self, and they are now immersed in the light of God. And the light of God speaks through them, as them, right? So before we depart from the world of the Sufi, the best display of this that I can think of right now is Al-Hallaj, who in Arabic said, Anoki al-Haq, I am reality. And they hung him for it. But it was this idea that reaches the heart of the awakened one, that there is none other but God. This is the ultimate. Your mind is nirvana. Your mind is the light of God. And so this path, the unfolding of your own myth, eventually gets you to the realization that there is no other. There is no inside or outside. There is no higher or lower. This is the great realization. And so, like empty space, you're in it right now. But we're not paying attention to it. And we have all of these thoughts and ideas and theories that take us out of it, constantly thinking we're someone else and somewhere else rather than who and where we truly are. This is why getting quiet, meditating, learning how to do and be nothing and sit is so vital to this practice. Because eventually what happens is you begin to distinguish between the observer and what's being observed. The light of awareness and what's arising within awareness. And as this becomes clearer to you, you're no longer led astray by the illusions that the mind is conjuring, but you actually keep turning it around, turning your attention to rest in your deepest state. And from there, everything else happens on its own. This is the joy of living a life completely free of yourself. So I'm told.
So, to my favorite part of this talk now. This is a really wonderful book. This is Stones to Shatter the Stainless Mirror. It's the life of the Mahasiddha Naropa. And Naropa, very much like Al-Ghazali, was the premier scholar. I mean, you could actually just replace the names, except not Baghdad, but Nalanda University in India. Naropa was the king's favorite. He was the smartest guy. And here's a little bit of his story that I think we can all relate to as it continues to unfold. It's an interesting opening to his biography, or autobiography. And it starts with this. I, Naropa, not seeing all things as the mind of clear light, made freedom almost unobtainable by naming it Talopa. So remember, your mind is nirvana. There's no Buddha apart from your mind. The Buddha is a product of your mind. That's why Zen Master Lin Chi would say, if you meet the Buddha on the path, kill the Buddha. Right? This idea of killing the Buddha is do not be led astray by phenomena. Anything that you're looking at that's an object is not the real state of what is. You come to the ground where there's no phenomenon but the observer of all phenomenon. Know that as yourself. Everything else is an object in the awareness. So he's saying, I almost did not obtain the clear light, this nirvanic mind, this Buddha consciousness. I almost didn't obtain it because I called it Talopa. Not understanding that I am already the mind of clear light, I sought the guru outside myself. In truth, the guru Talopa never existed, though I gambled everything to find him. So this is the paradox. He's going to have to go on his journey. He's going to have to unfold his myth. It's going to look like there's the Naropa trying to seek out and find Talopa, who will then enlighten him. But once that really has clicked, then Naropa and Talopa disappear, and there's the mind of clear light that always was shining. We just didn't see it. So he's saying, the guru Talopa never existed, though I gambled everything to find him. Yet, what did I have to lose? Now listen to this. You and I do not exist either. Reminds some of us of the opening introduction of A Course in Miracles. Nothing real can be threatened. Nothing unreal exists. Herein lies the peace of God. You and I never existed. How wonderful. How heartwarming. All of your problems never existed. All of your struggles never existed. There is only the mind of clear light. But if we're not looking for it, we will miss it. We will name it 100,000 things and never find it. That's why, again, paradox. You and I do not exist either, yet here you are reading about me. Where we are does not exist either, but is merely a reply to the questions being asked of the I. Right? So this is when we're getting into these deeper esoteric teachings, that even the idea of time, space, and locale are mirages or props within the mind, schoolhouses. And they're designed to provide the right context and the right structure and the right environment for you to cultivate the mind of clear light. And when you no longer need the grade that you're in, the structure, the schoolhouse, it disappears. You'll advance to the next grade, and then that will disappear, and then the next, and that will disappear. until you've exhausted the use of props and symbols, no longer needing a talopa, but realizing everything is emerging as the mind of clear light. Isn't that beautiful? Can you feel the resonance within you of this teaching? It's always here. The mind of clear light hasn't a form, yet you can see it everywhere. The mind of clear light hasn't a voice, yet you can hear it singing in all things. The mind of clear light doesn't have a taste, yet you never cease licking it off your lips. The mind of clear light is disguised as dust on the windowsill, a chair, a table, and even your favorite coffee cup. All things are a pulsating pointing to a world in which nothing exists. And soon you will say, there is nowhere it is not, beyond words, beyond symbols, beyond religion, resting on nothing without reliance, remaining ever neutral, inconceivable, and in no need of liberation. Right? This is again something that's mentioned in A Course in Miracles, where he's saying all of these salvation and liberation teachings are the illusions to undo all other illusions. Right? So the teaching itself, as Buddha would say, is like a raft to get you to reality. Once you've reached the destination, which is your own mind of clear light, the teaching has served its function. You don't take the teaching and put it on your head and start walking on the other shore with the boat. It was a vehicle to eventually get you to the place of reality. It's an illusion, to undo all illusions. And as the Course says, when you get to the place of knowing yourself again, really recognizing who you've always been, you would laugh at the thought of ever being not this. You hear the bird? This is how it plays out every moment. That's the gateway. Every moment you're given this gateway. That's why when you cultivate this silent mind, this watchful mind, as it says in some of the Zen teachings, like you could be out shoveling or hoeing your field and a rock will hit the wooden post, and the sound of that rock hitting the wooden post was what you needed for everything to get clear. So when the mind is ripe and ready, all of these infinite possibilities of entering the gateway into non-duality start showing up endlessly. So Naropa says, so let's slow down a bit with the story of the journey and the path which led us here. But be prepared when I'm done. Your eyes will open to find it is you in Buddha's skin. 2,600 years ago is today. You are awakening under the Bodhi tree. And perhaps looking at your hands, feet, the sky, and all around this strange new world, you will whisper the truth that has always been there hidden. And when all religion had fallen away from me, and in that moment I knew, my mind is the perfect Buddha. My speech is the perfect teaching. My body is the perfect Sangha, or community. There's no need to search for Naropa. I am here. So that's the beginning of his speaking from the place of arriving. Now, chapter 2, we'll touch in just a little bit. is where he began as this bewildered scholar. And I love the way that this starts off. There was a time in my magical dualistic elaboration in which I and others took me very seriously. In fact, as if facts do exist, 500 monks once begged me with folded hands to become their abbot. And not just any abbot, but the abbot of the famed Nalanda, the world's first spiritual university. And as was the custom of installing a new scholar, I would have to defend my doctrine against anyone that would challenge me in debate. And of course, he kicked butt. Right? So now he's installed as the abbot of this prestigious university. And listen to this now. Even with all the outward signs of success and bravado, there was no contentment. And for 8 long years, enlightenment was for me a beautiful theory of which I could describe eloquently. But in truth, none of us at the university believed it. Now, this goes again to our present day as well as to the day of Naropa. Listen to this now. Within the walls of the most prestigious spiritual university in the world, Naropa says, within the walls of this so-called monastery, hiding behind robes, pawing beads or mala, and mumbling prayers, were criminals, drunkards, opium smokers, thieves, thugs, slanderers, gamblers, liars, bullies, whore buyers, pimps, and sex offenders, right? Dressed in the robes. And I grimaced at the one in the mirror, for I saw all of this and more in myself. But for me at least, all this would change one seemingly normal day while studying out on the balcony. So now he's about to describe his encounter with what in Tibetan lore, Tibetan Buddhism, would be called a dakini. And a dakini is the female embodiment of this vast supreme wisdom, right? The mind of nirvana, taking form as a female shape. And dakinis, just like at our start we talked about Beauty and the Beast, dakinis often take the form of haggard women, repulsive creatures, dirty dogs covered in fleas. So here comes this haggard old woman, and she stands behind Naropa, who's out on the porch reading his book, and her shadow casts onto the page that he's reading. And before he gets to that, listen to how he describes what he's doing, studying on the balcony. I'm looking once more over some tired old texts that were as lifeless and uninspired as I was. Old books, like old scholars, are rarely useful, other than to be put on a shelf by their possessor for bragging rights of owning them. I owned the books. Nalanda, the university, owned me. And we were both fakes, bad forgeries of some original pristine idea that somehow loses its purity when made to stand still in paper, brick, and skin. So like Ghazali, he's being torn. Because one of the things that is at play is when you do study these teachings and you get into the theories of them, there's something that begins to enter your heart and it begins to go to work. Just like maybe in this conversation you're feeling that. There is something ancient and primordial in you that gets stirred up when these teachings are transmitted to you. And Naropa was getting that. Naropa was getting that feeling of gestation of the Buddha seed. And he could not continue living in the fakery of his known life at that time. Something had to change, something drastic. So he says, the natural order broke down this day. And while I'm studying with my mind half wandering, there's this appearance of this dakini. And this old woman he describes as ghastly. Her eyes were red, bloodshot, and bulging. Her hair, a greasy, stringy mess, sitting on top of a huge forehead. Her face was cracked, her skin wrinkled, her nose shriveled and almost non-existent. Her ears were a large, lumpy mass. Her jaws were crooked and covered in yellow stubble. Her mouth distorted and pulled to the left. Her teeth missing, twisted and rotten. Her back bent and humped. Her feet bare, red and puffy. Skin flaky and scaly with yellow, long toenails that were filthy. She stank of death and cabbage. And she's leaning forward on her cane, and she said to him, "What are you studying there, boy?" For a second or two, no words can come to my mouth. My mind was reeling around, trying to land on a logical answer to what I was seeing and hearing. And at that time, trying to formulate a reply to her question. And then he musters up the response, words. And she starts cackling and dancing and throwing her hands around because he said words. And then she stops and she says, "Do you understand those words?" And he says, "Yes, I understand them quite well." And then she slumps over and starts crying. And he got very pissed at her. He was angry. I quickly thought of thrashing her like a dog and even throwing her off the balcony. Did she not know I was the great scholar Naropa, the man who defeated 100 challengers in debate and was begged by the king and all the rest to be abbot of this noble institution because of my supreme intellect? But the anger subsided into the truthful resignation that she was right. This time it was me leaning forward, asking questions. "Lady, tell me, please, who does know the meaning?" And she says, eventually my brother Talopa. So go and find him. So that's when Naropa turns his back on the university and heads into the unknown, leaves the life of fakery and security, because those two often go together, fakery and security. And he sets out. So I should say before he leaves, he says this, she disappears. And he says, looking down at the text, I saw it all very clearly now. A lifeless book being held in a lifeless hand. I, Naropa, thought of those that wrote these ancient texts and wondered, were they like me? All ink and no bliss? I get a little verklempt. This hits home. Were they all like me? All ink and no bliss? And there's not one left still breathing to tell me if these be truths, in fact, or merely a groping attempt at recognition in immortality. In other words, I don't even know if this stuff is real. Like, if I really think about it, why am I supposed to believe any of this? Could it all just be, a big mind trip? So he leaves behind all his belongings and his books, and he heads out. And just a little bit more here. So he's on this path now, and he keeps coming across these people and creatures that are very off-putting. And he always has the same reaction, that he's better than them. He has a disdain or an aversion to them. And this is something within the Mahasiddha tradition of Buddhism that's often put into play in these teachings, that when we look at things that are decaying, vile, and disgusting, we have an immediate reaction of distancing ourselves from them. But within this teaching, we're being asked to look at them clearly, to see that our judgments are what we are reacting to, rather than what's really there. What's really there, beyond the appearance, is the rainbow light of clear mind. Right? So every time he walks over this dog or this leprous and diseased woman, they disappear into rainbow light. So this is what's being taught in these teachings, that all of your obstacles, all of your aversions, all of our sufferings are actually God in disguise, rainbow light in disguise, designed to bring us to a place of deeper understanding and commitment to discovering who we are. So he talks about the Dakini, and he says, woman, in all mystic traditions, is the very symbol of infinite potential, the creator of all life, source of all things, and energy in motion. But of course, I didn't think of any of this at the time that I'm looking at this diseased, leprous woman, all black. And all I saw was this nasty, sick thing blocking my path. I looked at it as I looked at all life, looking for flaws, imperfections, evilness, impurities, unwholesomeness, and vermin. I, Naropa, was a high-born Brahmin, social elite, a famous monk and scholar. I suppose that hag could have given me fleas or lice or had infected me in some way. And then he says, besides, already I carried around a constant low-level anxiety about things getting out of control. So again, when I read this, it hits home, because I can't tell you how many times with Lisa, my partner, who happens to be a woman, she oftentimes will walk up to let's say a stray cat, and this happened a number of years ago. There was this stray cat, and she goes right up and starts petting it and comforting it and loving on it. And in my mind, I'm like, that cat probably has fleas. That, who knows, it could have rabies. And I'm always finding myself in this place of standing away from or apart from, with this low-level anxiety that it's not safe, shouldn't do that. Something can go wrong. And in some ways, I think that could be healthy. And in other ways, here she is, I think, coaxing me, helping me on the path of knowing how to let down my guard, soften, open to life, trust the situation, not fear any kind of blowback, but be there willing to give the compassion and extend yourself to someone else in need, even if they don't fit your description of what's safe or good. I'm going to bring it to a close here. So on that note, we close with this. Surprise yourself by being unpredictable and trustworthy. Change your style of clothes, change your look, grow a beard, shave your head, grow your hair long, cut it all off, join a group, quit a group, go down different streets, talk to different people, learn a trade, learn an instrument, Learn a silly game. Do something different. Do the opposite of what you have normally done. Walk out of town. Come back to town. Call your father and mother. Stop calling your father and mother so much. Disappear or reappear. Forget everything you know about yourself. Start again, knowing nothing. Practice never saying another negative thing about yourself, people, places, things, and even the weather. Be honest, even when dealing with someone that doesn't like you. Warn others of traps, even if they won't listen. People learn from mistakes, but help them get back up when they fall. So let's just take a moment, let all of that soak in. Hopefully it was helpful. Blue bag's going to go around. You can stay within that meditative state even during the tithing process. If you're joining us online, you can click the link below whenever you're ready. And donating to the 8 a.m. service, we thank you very much. Any thoughts, questions, comments? John?
Thinking about all the translations of these ancient texts, I'm wondering how they can be so accurate. You know, somebody could read a sentence and translate it into multiple different meanings. I'm wondering how, because they're all different writers and different texts written for it.
Yeah, there are different translations, different versions. No translation is perfect. And back to the point of our talk, generally speaking, no words are going to really get you there. They're at best going to point you in the right direction. Yeah. Bless the offering. We just charge it with the intention that whatever form this energy takes, it brings all happiness and blessing to all beings. So it is. Amen. Anything else? Any thoughts, comments, questions before we close out? All right. Let's seal the deal. Resting within the quiet center of the heart, knowing that this very moment is all there really is. And as we come to rest in the heart and we open to reality, the light of God surrounds us. The love of God enfolds us. The power of God protects us. And the presence of God watches over us wherever we are, God is. Amen. Thanks, everybody. I appreciate you. Tomorrow night, 7:15, A Course in Miracles.